Principles and Practice of Procurement, Unit 5, Section 3, Using Competition to Obtain Quotations. Apart from the approaches to pricing that we have considered in the previous section, it is important to look at how to make use of competition to obtain quotations. Thus, we are going to look at some of the approaches used in competitive bidding or tendering and contract award, as well as how to analyze quotations and tenders itself in this section. At the end of this section, we should be able to understand the different approaches to contract award, competitive bidding or tendering, the tendering process, analyze quotations and tenders. There are different approaches the buying organization can use to award contracts or approach a contract. We have the competitive approaches as well as the non-competitive approaches. The competitive approach here will be the competitive tendering, where the invitation to tender is published online or in a medium that is accessible to the whole organization, that is accessible to everyone in the nation to submit their tender documents if they deem or they think they qualify. The organization may also use some of the non-competitive approaches. Like for instance, when the organization have already negotiated a framework agreement or a standing order contract with a particular supplier to meet the requirements or to supply the requirements of a certain type. So I as a buying organization, I have already negotiated with a supplier that anytime I need a particular requirement, I'm going to call you and you're supposed to meet the requirement. So anytime I need a particular requirement that I have negotiated with you, I just pick my phone or send out an email requesting you to submit or supply this quantity at this place or this time. We've already agreed on the term in our framework. In an instance where there is only one supplier in the market, that is the sole sourcing, then the buying organization has no other choice or no other option than to just walk to that particular supplier because you are the only supplier for that requirement in the market. So we just come to you and then negotiate with you. Or we can also use the single sourcing where there are other suppliers in the market. However, the buying organization chooses to work with a particular supplier, a preferred supplier, based on justifiable reasons best known to the organization. Remember, in public procurement, you can only use single sourcing when the reasons for using the single sourcing is justifiable. You can have a reason like in case of emergency or in case where anytime you use competitive tendering and advertising the contracts online, only one particular supplier emerges as the winner. Anytime you do this, there is only one particular supplier that emerges as a winner. Then you realize that subsequently there is no need advertising. You just go to that supplier and negotiate. We can also have an instance where the organization will just go to their supplier approved list where the suppliers they have been pre-qualified and send out the RFQ, request for quotation document, providing that a minimum of 3 suppliers are met. So these are some of the approaches the organization can use to award contracts. We can have the competitive tendering, we can negotiate a framework agreement with a supplier, we can use the sole sourcing where there is only one available supplier, we can use single sourcing where there is one single dependable or preferred supplier in the market, or we can issue the RFQ document providing that there are a minimum of 3 suppliers are met. Competitive bidding or competitive tendering. Competitive tendering is used when the requirement in question, the requirement we seek to procure, is of high value, such that we want to ensure competition in the process. So anytime the value of the item is high, we use competitive tendering. And we can measure this value or this value with thresholds. The thresholds are indicated in the Public Procurement Act 2003, Act 663 as amended. There are thresholds which will require the organization to use competitive tendering, and there are also thresholds which will require the organization to use the request for quotation. And with the competitive tendering, we have 2 types, the open tendering and the selective or restrictive tendering. The open tendering is when the invitation is open to everybody. The invitation document is advertised in a local newspaper such that it's accessible by every supplier who is interested. The selective or restrictive tendering is when the organization selects some suppliers, usually between 3 to 5, based on some justifiable reasons for which you are using selective instead of the open tendering. So the supplier will use competitive tendering to choose the one or the supplier submitting the best proposal or the lowest value. We can't just wake up as an organization and choose to use competitive tendering. So there are some criteria that must fall in place before we choose to use the competitive tendering. So some of these criteria are stated below. I'm going to briefly go through some of them. The first criteria for competitive bidding is when the value of the purchase is high enough to justify the expense of the process. So like we said earlier, when the value is high, that's when we use competitive tendering. You can't spend money, waste resources on a process, on a value, on an item that is of low value. There, you after the whole process, you realize that the amount you used in the process, the competitive bidding process, is even more than the value of the requirements, the value of the item you are procuring. Then value for money has not been achieved in this process. So we can only use competitive tendering when the value of the item or value of the purchase is high enough to justify the use of this process. The second reason or second criteria is the specifications must be clear and the potential suppliers must have a clear idea of the cost involved in fulfilling the contract. The specification document you are using to invite your potential suppliers must be very clear. Any supplier that takes the document should be able to understand exactly what you want. And the requirements must be such that it's easy to determine the cost involved in fulfilling the contract. Only when these conditions are met that we can use competitive tendering. We have the third criteria to be there must be an adequate number of potential suppliers in a market. Obviously, with competitive tendering, we are advertising to a whole lot of suppliers, right? We are trying to reach as many suppliers as we can in order to maximize competition in the whole process. And in so doing, we incur a lot of cost as well as use a lot of resources. So if you know as a buying organization or as a procurement professional, you know there are about 2-3 suppliers of that particular requirement you want. Even if you advertise it internationally, only those 3 suppliers are going to be able to meet your requirements. Then why will you waste your time, resources, your money going through all the process while you could just approach those 2, 3, 4 suppliers and negotiate the contract with them and award the contract to the best tenderer? So we are saying we can't use competitive tendering when we don't have enough supplies in the market. The fourth criteria is the potential suppliers must be both technically qualified and keen for the business. The suppliers we are advertising our document to must have the knowledge, must have the skills, the technical know-how, the people to execute the contract. If you know, or after previous advertisements, you realize that 1 or 2 suppliers are the only ones who are able to meet the technical qualification that you are looking out for. After so many awards, after so many contracts, only these 2 or this one supplier is able to meet the skills you need. Then why waste time advertising to the lots when you could just go to this 1 or 2 suppliers and then negotiate with them? When there is enough or sufficient time for the procedure to be carried out. If you don't have enough time, if it's an issue of emergency, we don't have time, then we can't use competitive tendering. We just go to a preferred supplier and negotiate the terms with them. Because competitive tendering takes time. Situations in which competitive tendering should not be used. 1. It is important to estimate production cost. So if you realize it's impossible in this case to estimate your production cost, then we shouldn't use competitive tendering. Because the suppliers you're inviting are supposed to submit their tender documents with prices. So if it's impossible to estimate this cost of production, then we can't use this method. We have to look for other suitable methods to use, right? Also, when price is not the only or most important criteria in the award of the contract. There are some contracts you realize that price is not even an issue. We need the technical know-how. We need experienced people. We need suppliers to come up with innovative ideas to help solve the problem at hand. When you realize that is the case, we don't use competitive tendering. We invite qualified or we pre-qualify some suppliers through our supply appraisal process in order to identify some suppliers who can come up with these innovative solutions that we want. When changes to specification are likely to occur as the contract progresses, then we are saying we can't use competitive tendering. Changes in specification will mean changes in the cost, will also mean changes in the technical capabilities, the knowledge, the skills. How are you sure that whatever change that arise, the current supplier you're awarding the contract will be able to meet that skills or have the technical know-how to execute the new change that is occurring? Do you even know the additional cost element that you're going to incur should the change occur? So anytime you realize that changes are bound to occur in the specification, you don't use competitive tendering. You look for other suitable methods. Additionally, when special tooling or setup costs are major factors in the contract, then we don't use competitive tendering. The setting up the special tooling comes with its own cost. Setup will come with its own cost. Moving the special tools from probably from the supplier side to the organization side or to the production side will come with its own cost. If care is not taken, you end up with so many costs you could have avoided. So if these costs are major factors, then we use other methods. We don't consider competitive tendering. I already explained earlier that we have two types of tendering: the selective or restrictive tendering and the open tendering. The selective or restrictive tendering is when potential suppliers are pre-qualified and about 3 to 10 suppliers are shortlisted for invitation to tender, whereas the open tendering is when the invitation to tender is widely advertised and open to any potential supplier. A typical tendering will go through these processes. We're going to briefly go through the processes for tendering. The first stage or the first process we have here is the preparation of detailed specifications and draft contract documents by procurement department. We should make sure as a buying organization that right from the onset, the detailed specification we need is available. It is ready. The contract draft is also ready, so that we'll be able to ascertain whether the tenders we are receiving comply with the requirements or the documents we sent out, and to also enable us choose the lowest price or the best value bid. 2. Decision on whether to use open or selective or restrictive tendering. The buying organization will need to make decision as to which of the tendering processes to use. Are we using the open tendering? Are we using selective or restrictive tendering? Do we have enough supplies in the market to justify the use of open tendering? Why are we using restrictive or selective tendering? Will we be able to justify the use of the selective or open tendering? After analyzing a number of factors, the organization is able to come to a decision, a conclusion as to which of the types of tendering to use. 3. Determination of a realistic timetable for the tender process, allowing reasonable time for responses at each stage. We can't just send out documents and expect suppliers to respond at their own convenience whenever they want, right? We set timetable. We need to know the time convenient for or the right time that a requirement is needed. And once we know this, we know the kind of deadlines to give to each stage, how many days, how many weeks, how many months to give to each stage, to assign to each stage. 4. Issue of invitations to tender. So if you are using, from the second point, we decided to use the open tendering, then we advertise the invitation to tender document in a medium that will be accessible by all suppliers. If we also decided to use the selective or restricted tendering, then we send this invitation document to the shortlisted suppliers that we chose or we decided to go with. 5. Submission of completed tenders or bids by potential suppliers. So now that we've issued the tender documents, we've indicated the deadlines applicable and all that, we just sit down and wait to receive the documents by the potential tenderers. And then we should know that we don't accept any document after the deadline. Any document that we receive after the deadline must be returned to the tenderers unopened. We don't touch that document. Once we receive it after the deadline, we send it back. 6. Opening of tenders on the appointed date. Tenders received after this date should be returned unopened. Okay, we already said this. Then 7. Analysis of tender according to stated criteria with a view of selecting the best offer. We're supposed to analyze the documents we've received. We match whatever the supplier is giving us with that of our specification, what we stated in the document, what we are looking out for, to know which suppliers are giving us the best value, the best offer, the best solution to the current problem at hand. Now, after we have identified the best tenderer, the best or the winning bid, we award the contract to that winning tenderer. Finally, the giving of feedback on request to unsuccessful tenderers. We have to make it known that this particular tenderer won this contract, reasons why this particular tenderer won, what the particular supplier didn't do well, what you could have done to improve the document you submitted, what you should do next time. You just provide this feedback to suppliers or the tenderers that tendered in their process in order to help them improve their own processes next time. Analyzing quotations and tenders. The general principle is that the successful tender will be the one with the lowest price. However, there is more to it than this. A tender may be analyzed on the basis of a performance or functional specification, and there may be the need to discuss and analyze how effectively each tender meets the requirement. It's not always that the lowest tender or the lowest price is awarded a contract. We are looking at the requirements, the document or the tender that is going to give us the best solution, the whole package. We are considering the whole package, not just price. So if you have the lowest price, the least price anybody can think of, and then your document is not providing us the best solution, then we are not bound to work with you or award a contract to you. One solution may be more attractive than the other, even if the price tells against it. So if such a case happens, if you realize one particular supplier or one particular tenderer is doing very well, the solution is excellent, however, the price is telling against such a tenderer or such a supplier, then what we do as a buying organization is that we enter into post-tender negotiation with that particular supplier, the preferred supplier, to qualify and clarify the tenders and to discuss potential improvements or adjustments to the supplier's offers in order to award the contract to that particular supplier, since that supplier is giving us the best solution. However, if there is a potential for post-tender negotiation to be held, then you have to state it in your tender document. The invitation document, the document you are sending out to invite tenderers to come and bid, you need to make it known in that document that if there is a need for the organization to enter into any post-tender negotiation with any preferred supplier, then it will so be that, to ensure transparency, just so the suppliers or the tenderers do not think we are being unfair or we are being biased. A checklist for analyzing tenders. 1. Establish a routine for receiving and opening tenders, distributing copies as appropriate and ensuring security. 2. We should set out clearly the responsibilities of the department involved so that each department will know or each person will know what they are supposed to do. 3. We should establish objective award criteria. On what basis are we going to use to award the contract? What are the scales or the weights, the importance we are assigning to each objective in the award criteria, in the document, the tender document that has been submitted to us? These criteria should have been set out in the initial invitation to tender. 4. We need to establish teams for the appraisal of each tender, ensuring that the required team members will be available during the time they are required. 5. We should establish a standardized format for logging and reporting of tenders. So for instance, some organizations have their standard forms. So anytime we open the tenders, we are able to record, okay, this particular supplier A submitted this tender here. They are able to supply this quantity, the price they are charging, we indicate the price. They are registered with this board. If they are, we take. If they are not, we cancel. They have paid their taxes, we take our cash. We have this standardized form we use for all tenders. 6. We check that the tenders received comply with the award criteria. Remember, we already established this criteria in the invitation to tender document, so the suppliers are aware of the criteria. So we need to know what is in their document, and whatever is in the document must comply with the award criteria. You should check the arithmetical accuracy of each tender. It's not that you are saying your unit price is 5 cedis and then the total quantity you are supplying is 10, and then when we add everything we are getting 100,000. I mean, where is that figure coming from? So you need to check the accuracy of these arithmetics. Then 8, we need to eliminate suppliers whose total quoted price is above the lowest price quote by a specified percentage. For example, we need to eliminate any supplier whose quoted prices more than, let's say, 20% above the average of the lowest two quotes. Then we evaluate the tenders in accordance with predetermined checklist for technical, contractual, and financial details. The keyword here is predetermined. It's not now that we've opened the tenders that we're going to set these checklists. We don't want the issue of conflict of interest to play here. So we predetermine this. We don't even know what is in each tenders document. And use the predetermined checklist to assess for or to evaluate their technical capabilities, their contractual and financial details. And then we prepare a report on each tender for submission to the project manager and as a basis for feedback to unsuccessful tenders where relevant. By way of summary, we have looked at the different approaches to contract award in the quest to use competition to obtain quotations. We also discussed at length the competitive bidding or tendering process. We then looked at how to analyze quotations and tenders. Thank you.